Story 1. Enough to pay all the bills on autopay without checking my bank balance first. That level of peace of mind is the real perfect salary.
Enough to pay for Parmesan cheese whenever I want, without looking at how much it costs.
I can't fathom taking too long to finish blocks of any size. I'm so sparse with them and try to make the small ones last months. But one day I want to buy a wheel at Costco, sharing Parmesan with the whole neighborhood.
The not worrying level is huge. At one point, I was checking my bank account balance literally multiple times a day to see if I had to do any theatrics to make it through the week. Just knowing there's enough and a bit of a buffer really takes the edge off. That change was palpable. If my electric bill that was due on the 18th last month comes out on the 16th this month instead, for whatever reason, I don't give a shit. Phew.
Story 2. John D. Rockefeller once said the perfect amount of money is just a little bit more. Humans quickly adapt and desire more.
Lifestyle creep is crazy. My income has increased by 50% in the past 2 years, but my monthly savings are the same because I moved to a more expensive city, got a bigger, more central apartment, eat out more, and so on. It all just happens one little bit at a time.
How many people do you think that, once they have enough money, start consciously buying clothes, products, and items that are ethically sourced? Or do you think they just buy more of the same stuff? What do you count as exploitation? Is the top you buy, made in Bangladesh, exploitation even if they are being paid $3 a day? A job's a job, right? Or that Nestle hot chocolate that you treat yourself to. Before any moron tries to call me a bootlicker, I'm not defending or advocating for billionaires, but it's easier to point fingers than to look at ourselves in the mirror. So, where do you draw the line?
Sadly, I share this sentiment. I started flying private charters last year, and now I've decided I won't truly be done working until my next nest egg can cover that for all of my flights with cushion.
Story 3. 150,000 US dollars with yearly inflation increases. I've made more, I've made less, but that general amount was enough to feel comfortable, not worry about things, or needing to look to see if you can get that appetizer. More expensive places may need to adjust more, but it's solid for an average cost of living area.
That sounds about right. I make more than that now, but I also live in New York, so maybe equivalent to $150,000 on average. But mine would be, I don't know, twice that. Not because I'm greedy, but because I'm getting old and some retirement savings would be nice, while still being able to eat out without having to check my bank balance.
I'm in a medium-high cost of living area in the United States, not quite New York City or Los Angeles costs, but a good 75 to 80% of that. The lowest price for a one-bedroom apartment within a 40-minute radius is currently $1,800 per month before utilities and fees. So approximately $2,000 per month all in. 3 to 4-bedroom family houses are renting for anywhere from $3,500 to $5,500 per month, depending on size and location. I started off as an engineer working in this area right out of college. My first year of working, my rent for a one-bedroom apartment was exactly 50% of my take-home pay.
What's your biggest expense in the U.S.? Rent? I've heard it's super expensive over there.
Story 4. I make $55,000 right now and I'm doing pretty okay. If I made $80,000 and kept the same lifestyle, I'd be living large.
When I was in my early 20s, $80,000 was my magic number. I'm now 45, and I'll say, aim higher. Life can be interesting.
Sounds about right, depending on your level of debt and spending habits. People who can't make it on a normal salary just suck with money.
Story 5. Single, no kids. I can live comfortably on $60,000 to $65,000. I also don't spend a lot of money on dumb shit.
Yeah, no kids, no cars on finance, and it's easy to live on.
This is about how much my mind went to. In the $65,000 to $75,000 range, guaranteed until retirement. I live in a medium cost of living city in Florida. I could afford health insurance, replace my 20-year-old car, and continue to maintain the house and support my parents in their retirement. That's really all I want.
Yeah, agreed. That's about the floor for comfort for a solo person in middle America without debts besides a mortgage.
Story 6. About $150,000. For taxes, then rent for a house big enough for my family to enjoy good health and activity in, then expenses, then savings.
$150,000 for a family of 3 or 4 aligns well with my estimate of $65,000 to $70,000 for a single person. It is where you should be able to have some savings and not stress about everyday or surprise expenses.
Story 7. He was talking about a decent life. You all have some crazy numbers here for a decent life. To live in a moderately sized city with, say, 2 kids and be able to retire with $200,000 is more than enough. Now, if you want a comfortable life, that would be different. But a decent life means you can pay the bills, go on a vacation you've budgeted for, and afford things easily, like a car repair.
I agree. It's decent if you have money left over for emergency funds and so on. I understand people with kids. That pushes it way higher, though.
Story 8. $120,000 in most parts. That's enough to take care of any necessities and have spending money for leisure and vacations. You can own a home and buy a new car for yourself when necessary with that kind of money. If you have a family with kids, you probably want $250,000 between the two of you for a comfortable, mostly financially stress-free life. You can absolutely live a decent life with less, but you will have to budget and forego things. Story 9. For me at this age, 60 million would be more than enough. In 10 years, though, this would change.
Yeah, 60 million per year should just be about right.
I don't know, man.
60 million seems pretty safe to say that it would still be more than enough in 10 years.
I'm in the same boat. I only made $43,000 last year, but I was just fine. How? I don't know. So this year, I hope to get to $60,000 to $70,000 and see how that feels.
Story 10. I'm pretty sure there have been a lot of studies on the concept of how much money do you need to be happy? One of the themes is that people usually say 2 to 3 times their current salary, regardless of what they actually make. If you make $50,000, you think 100 to 150,000. If you make 200,000, you think 400 to 600,000.
We started out on food stamps. Now we're at about 300,000, a family of 6. 150,000 is enough.
Story 11. About 90 to 100,000 pounds yearly in the UK because of high taxes, but monthly post-tax around 5,000 pounds. That's about 6.8 thousand US dollars. Would be pretty good. That's for one person. If partnered, then another 50 to 70% would be decent. In my opinion, considering the high cost of living and inflation.
Not gonna lie, I feel like that's insanely high. I make about $3,500 a month net, and I'm not sure what I could possibly spend that money on that would contribute towards a decent life. I already have enough for holidays every few months, buying a flat, eating nice food, and going out every week. What more are you guys spending on?
Yeah, I agree. 40K is the new 20K. 5K a month in the UK would be perfect to live a comfortable life.
If you have kids, that's easily another 1,000 to 2,000 pounds a month on childcare, activities, etc. And all your holidays are up to 3 times as expensive.
Story 12. $100,000 annually will let you lead a decent life. I should say, as long as you know how to budget. Story 13. It heavily depends on where you live and what decent means. I think you are better off working backwards from what you want in your decent life and figuring out the salary needed, since things like food and housing vary wildly even in the same country. You can be very well off in a lower cost of living area but doing much worse on the same salary in a different city. If I had to give a pretty good definition for my country, I would like a place to live in a safe, quiet area, a 2-bedroom apartment or a nice place with an office and 1.5 bathrooms. The location should be within 30 minutes to work. For food, I should be able to go to a normal grocery store without worrying about prices, assuming I am not buying lots of expensive meats or fancy fruit that is $30 a piece. I should have a car with all costs covered, be able to put away 20% of my gross income as investments for my future, afford 1 or 2 decent holidays a year where I can travel, maybe $10,000 per person, and have enough extra income to eat out often and indulge in events or hobbies. I kind of think for my country this is probably close to $100,000, excluding the most unaffordable locations. Then maybe $150,000 if it is one of those, because stuff just costs more and a good chunk of that also goes to taxes. Story 14. There was a point in our lives where we transitioned into just a monthly cash flow budget. We run everything through a credit card and pay it off each month. The daily stuff never really changes, and if there is a large purchase, we talk about it. We are in a pretty low cost of living area, and for us that was at about $200,000 per year when we started running our budget this way. The idea of a certain wealth is very personal and specific to each person's situation, I think. But I do think that one of the signs of wealth is when day-to-day spending isn't really monitored, but your net worth regularly increases. I track ours monthly on a simple spreadsheet to make sure our goals are being met. Story 15. It's insane, all these answers. In the UK, I would say living in the north. If both partners were on £50,000 a year, that's 100,000 between them, which would be about 6,000 a month as a couple. That would be enough to have a good house, not worry about shopping and so on, and 1 or 2 holidays a year. Story 16. In the United States, for a single person with no kids, assuming a decent health plan and no chronic ailments. Low cost of living area, $125,000 gross. Medium cost of living area, $175,000 gross. High cost of living area, $225,000 gross. Very high cost of living area, $300,000 gross. These amounts would theoretically be enough to afford a median house on your own, save at least 15% of earnings or better, and still handle emergencies and planned expenses without major impact. Personally, I live in a medium cost of living area making $93,000. Making $150,000 to $175,000 would be very comfortable. I could actually afford taking a vacation or pursuing some hobbies I'd like to do. But at $93,000, slightly over half my net income goes just to maintaining expenses like mortgage, utilities, student loan debt, groceries, and gas. My net is $5,000 a month, and probably at least $3,500 is just maintenance. So I am putting away some money, but house and car repairs eat up a decent portion of that savings, so really I'm just saving about $5,000 to $6,000 per year on average. I'm not hurting for bills, but I also don't really go out and do much. Even hitting $120,000 to $130,000 gross would ease up that pressure a bit.
London is the very high cost of living equivalent. Think Boston, New York City, San Francisco, Seattle. Most people in the United States don't make that much either and can't afford to live in those places. I'm with the original poster, though. Those would be good figures for a perfect salary without some wild figure. You don't get everything in life, but you get most of it.
Yes and no. The cost of ownership in a very high cost of living area is a leap that isn't as clear-cut as it first seems. Earning over $330,000 in New York City, and I still just rent a studio apartment. I can afford a one-bedroom, but owning anything reasonable to raise a family will only come with a windfall or a lucrative business venture.
For what it's worth, I live in a very high cost of living area and make $300,000 gross, and I think it's overshooting a bit. When I was at approximately $240,000 gross, that's when I could basically stop budgeting and not think about anything. Within reason, obviously. Not going to Michelin restaurants weekly or shopping very much, and still save tons of money. With $300,000, you'd be wildly comfortable.
Story 17. Perfect is a strange word to use here. The higher the better, right? But good enough. In my town in northern Italy, with 2,500 euros a month, it starts being pretty good. With 3,000, you'd probably live quite comfortably. Story 18, it will really depend on debt load, area of the country, and taxes. In most cases, for a family of 4 in an average cost of living area, this would be $140,000 to $175,000. Story 19. There was a widely cited pre-COVID study that 75,000 US dollars was the baseline for life satisfaction, and that further increases beyond that came at diminishing returns. With inflation, I would probably increase that to $85,000. Some of the answers in this thread are absolutely bonkers. Story 20. Maybe $250,000 a year would be enough to cover all the necessities, plus enough extra to enjoy life a little more without sacrificing anything. Story 21. When I made $35,000 in 2016, I wished I had $10,000 more. Now, in 2026, I make $85,000. I still wish I had $10,000 more. Story 22. As a single person, $60,000 net would be perfectly reasonable for a good life. A house, bills paid, and hobbies. Nothing fancy, But for someone not looking for the millionaire lifestyle, that'd be enough. I'd add an extra $25,000 per kid. Story 23. I live in the Midwest with 2 children, and I think if my husband and I jointly made $250,000, we would be quite comfortable. Story 24. We are at $270,000 gross in a moderate cost of living area. We have the investments, the nice cars, and the big house could be bigger based on what I see people buying with what they make. I'm getting a $60,000 raise this fall, probably buy another rental. Kids are well cared for, and my wife doesn't have to work. We are the lucky ones. The minute we stopped checking our bank account with everything on autopay every month was the minute we felt free. That probably happened around 200,000. Everything since has just been the cherry on top. Best of luck to all of you, and if anyone has a nuclear plant nearby, make sure to apply for an operations role. Story 25. Went from 120,000 about 2 years ago to 250,000 now. Our cost of living in America has almost doubled everywhere over the years. It's an outrage.
Understand this too. Here in the UK, what used to be £600 rent per month is now £1,100. What used to be £70 energy bills is now close to £200. Council tax, £180 a month. Water, £40 a month. It's a joke. Doing the local food shop now, 2 bags of shopping is close to £100. Beef has gone up like twice in the past few years.
Story 26. To give a general answer to a general question, I would say this: enough to pay for all bills and expenses for my family, savings for pensions, money for travel, gifts, activities, restaurants, and so on. For me and my family, at the standard I have now, converted to US dollars, that would be a household income of about 180 to 200,000 a year. To live decently, meaning to give up the location of our home rather than its size, eating out less, traveling to less expensive places, and so on, I could go much lower. As a student, I remember thinking my life was amazing. I probably earned less than 50,000 a year as a single parent. It's all very personal. Story 27. People have crunched the numbers on this a lot. One figure I see often is that if you want the classic American dream style of life, a wife, 2 kids, a pet, a nice house, and yearly vacation trips, plus savings for emergencies and a college fund, you would need to be making upwards of $100,000 to $200,000 at least. Story 28. Lifestyle creep consumes real gains from promotions and job hopping, and imagined gains like one-time bonuses and annual cost of living adjustments. The best thing the current you can do to make future you more comfortable is to figure out which items, household and otherwise, will last long enough. 18 years ago, my spouse made fun of me for replacing our trash cans with contractor-grade Rubbermaid Brute cans because they were $60 each. They've been hit by plow trucks, left out in winter and summer, and they just keep going. I estimate that each can I bought then has saved us more than $100 in replacement costs over almost 2 decades. I have a Burton snowboard backpack that has lasted me 30 years. It gets used all seasons, and the stitching and straps are solid. Best $200 I've spent on a utility item. So, if you can find quality at a price that fits your budget, you are looking out for future you. Story 29. Honestly, about $120,000 with good benefits will give you a pretty decent life where you really wouldn't have to worry about being frugal every fucking day. Like, you can eat out a few times a week and grab a bottle of wine or 2. Add to your furniture or movie collection once a week and have a relatively new vehicle. And that's just if you're single. I don't even want to imagine a wife and kids. Story 30. It really depends on what you consider a decent life. Having a gaggle of kids, new cars, a bigger house, more vacations, or fun toys costs more, and people value them differently. Story 31. I'll probably need about $150,000 to live comfortably in my current situation. However, a lot of that is tied to saving for my retirement. If that's not required, meaning I'll have that amount in retirement, then $100,000 will be fine with annual increases for inflation. Story 32. High cost of living city in Arizona. Median home price at $700,000. Average 2-bedroom apartment, $2,000 to $2,500 per month. I would be content as a single person around $130,000, which, after taxes, healthcare, and mandatory retirement, I would net about half of that. It really depends on the cost of living where you are, with housing being a huge factor. Story 33. Not perfect, but close. When I was making $103,000 a year, I felt it was really comfortable. I no longer needed to watch my budget, and there was still some left at the end of the month. This was around 2020. Now I make much more than that, but I feel like I'd be more comfortable with just a little more. I've added more international trips and hobbies, so I'm spending more than I did before. Story 34. For me, as a single man in Southern California, I think $150,000 a year would allow me to have a very decent life. If I had a wife and 2 kids, I think $225,000 a year would do. Story 35. Single? Earn $100,000 and live like you make only $40,000, and you'll be A-okay. Married? Have kids? Multiply everything in the first equation by the number of people in the household.
It's a good question, but mostly because you need a larger house and bigger or more cars. We have a 5-bedroom place and 3 kids, plus myself and my wife. I can't wait to sell this house and downsize.
Story 36. About 100 million. Anything less, you're just chasing the next plateau. 100 million is the start of the fuck you money. Story 37. I currently make $156,000 a year in Nashville. I'm married with 4 kids, 1 in college. We make enough to buy anything we want, pay all our bills, and put a bunch in the bank. Sure, I'd love a bit more, but I'm actually content at the moment.
For me, it's about living within our means.
Story 38. If you live naked in the woods, hunting and foraging for your own food, you don't need any salary at all.
Can't be spending any money on unnecessary stuff like clothes.
No need to waste money on washing powder.
Story 39. I found that 120,000 Australian dollars, about 84,000 US dollars, was the sweet spot for me and my lifestyle. It covered the bills, a holiday each year, some room to breathe when interest rates rise on the mortgage, and saving for retirement. Everything over that, I found, doesn't justify the extra work and is unnecessary for me and my lifestyle. I think, even though I'm earning about 190,000 Australian dollars, about 133,000 US dollars now, I was happiest at the 120,000 Australian dollars, or 84,000 US dollars mark. I make more, but I'm not as happy. Story 40. It depends on the area and cost of living there. Around here, the average income is $38,000, and my $160,000 salary makes life pretty easy. Extra easy with my wife's $300,000. I think around here, a family would not have many issues on two $50,000 salaries. However, with the price of cars, houses, and groceries now, it might not be so easy. Story 41. Whatever your rent or mortgage is, triple it, that's what you need. Rent or mortgage should never be more than 1/3 of your monthly salary. You're not really living if you travel 4 hours a day into New York to work because you cannot afford to live closer. Story 42. I'm earning £30,000 a year, and I live a decent life. New house, 3 or 4 trips to Europe each year, the fridge is always full. But perfect? £50,000 would mean I could invest more and retire early. I could also go on more trips and buy a bigger house. Story 43. It depends on where you're starting from and what your definition of decent is. Assuming no debt, medical issues, or kids, you can carve out a solid life in the United States without ever touching $100,000, at least today. I moved out to the Seattle area in the mid-2010s, making $15 an hour. I was able to immediately start saving money, shared an apartment. Even today, I still don't make $100,000, and I would certainly say life is at least decent. If you want brand new stuff, a single family home all to yourself, and so on, your expenses will go way up, and so the floor for a decent life will seem much higher. Story 44. It varies by region, but at this point it feels like $250,000 where I live. Story 45. $1 million. More seriously, 1. Pays all your bills. 2. Health insurance. 3. Savings. 4. Retirement. 5. Enough for a solid vacation each year. 6. Leftover enough for a hobby or 2. That's going to vary drastically for each person and locale. Story 46, it depends on how much debt you have, whether you have or want kids, and when you finally start earning that income. The threshold is different if you have no student loans and start earning it straight after college versus after $400,000 in grad school loans, and if you only start earning income in your late 30s. Story 47. I want everyone to get the same deal and no more billionaires or trillionaires. Everything that's left goes to the good of everyone. Nature, medicine, houses, water, power, bread, red wine, and so on. Story 48. I don't think money can ever satisfy humans. The more there is, the more they will expand their needs. Story 49. They do studies on this. Almost everybody puts their own annual compensation plus 33%. Story 50. I'm on a joint salary with my partner of £195,000, and we still live paycheck to paycheck. Story 51. A combined gross of $250,000 or more here in Australia, but it's all dependent on your personal situation. With a mortgage and kids, that means you'll live comfortably but need to budget, whereas if you have that without them, you're living a pretty cruisy lifestyle. Story 52. Nice cars and big houses are overrated for happiness, in my opinion. Even if you have a big family. As a single dude, I just want to be able to live in a small apartment in a halfway walkable area. Stack some money aside for retirement, be able to afford healthcare and all my needs, and be able to go out to eat or get a coffee a couple days a week to socialize, maybe a small vacation twice a year. This is literally what a middle-class life is supposed to provide, but I reckon less than a third of the population could afford this. In a normal cost of living city, I'd expect this to take about $75,000 a year. Story 53. I feel like this number changes a lot over time, and most people want more money as their careers progress. It also depends on the area and household size. I'm at $100,000 and it's more than enough right now for being dinks, dual income, no kids. Story 54. I live in Mississippi, and you can live a very fulfilling life down here on $50,000 to $60,000 a year. But then again, it is Mississippi, so that's the downside. Story 55. $250,000 a year after taxes. That's comfortable enough that I can buy a newer car, pay off my house, go on vacations, and actually enjoy my life, without having to find small jobs just to make extra money. Story 56. Where I live with 2 kids and a wife, if I wanted my wife to stay home and have a decent, not extravagant life, I'd need to earn about $300,000 on my own. By the way, I live in a high cost of living area, maybe even very high cost of living, honestly. My property taxes are over $20,000 a year. Story 57. I could breathe easy when I could go to the grocery store and buy my regular groceries without scouring for sale prices. Story 58. $100,000 is still the gold standard in most areas of the country. More in Los Angeles, San Francisco, or New York City, but those are atypical. Story 59. When I was single, I finally started feeling comfortable on about $50,000, but I also had a pretty favorable situation in terms of housing. In a more typical setting, I would have said it would take around $70,000 to really be comfortable and have no or little money stress where I live. With a couple of kids, you probably need about $125,000 to $200,000 household income in my area to live a comfortable lifestyle, depending on things like student loans. Story 60. It depends where you live. You'd need $1 million a year in San Francisco, but just $10,000 a year in Vietnam. Story 61. $1 million a year to live in Los Angeles. $500,000 after taxes. Any house with 5 or more bedrooms in a nice area is a minimum of $3 million, with insane property taxes of around $50,000 a year. Story 62. These days, you need to break into 6 figures to be comfortable and worry-free. Anything under $100,000 a year, and you're probably budgeting harder, worried about whether you can afford the next emergency that happens. Story 63. I earn £50,000 and live a comfortable life. I wouldn't say it's quite what I'd call decent. I'd need another £15,000 to £20,000 a year after tax to make it decent. Story 64. Just think if we all worked hard for TikTok. According to my daily junk mail, I can make up to $400 a day working from home. Laughing my ass off. Story 65. The one that pays all the bills and allows for some savings in the location you need to be able to afford. Story 66. You can make $240 to $500 a day just by watching videos, without having to leave your home. Story 67. People tend to grow into their wage, but studies show that it's about $160,000 before diminishing returns on happiness. Story 68. It depends on where you live and how you want to live. I live in the Bay Area, California, where a single-bedroom apartment costs at least around $2,300 or so. As a single guy, I am perfectly fine making $120,000. But I see people making the same as me who are struggling because they want to live an extravagant life to impress others for some reason. Story 69. If the figure stayed the same for a lifetime, then I'd say $325,000 for a decent life. I live in California. Story 70. Honestly, I'm not upset with my current salary. Obviously, the answer is always going to be, I could always use a little more. But I'll be honest and say I live a comfortable life right now. Between my military retirement pension and what I pull in at work, I make a bit over $100,000 per year. My wife adds another about $64,000 on top of that. It's not enough to be luxurious, but it's enough that I'm out of debt, except for my car note and house, and I'm able to pay my mortgage and bills, feed my family, and have play money for just about anything I want to do with my spare time. Within reason, and with some substantial planning, but I don't feel like I'm wringing my hands whenever we talk about taking a vacation or splurging on something superfluous. Story 71. I currently gross almost $70,000. Take home like $42,000. In the past, I had 1 year where I made $200,000. The most comfortable times of my life were when I was making $100,000. I paid bills, didn't splurge, and had money for fun projects. I'm struggling now. Story 72. If I took home what I make before taxes, it wouldn't be bad at all. Ideally, I'd say something like $100,000 after insurance and taxes. Story 73. Doesn't matter much to me. Having to work saps my energy to do much else. I'm frugal and have nothing to spend money on outside of bills. Extra 10,000. Hell, even 100,000. I'd still have to sacrifice my life to keep living. Just get to retire earlier or at all. Story 74. About $10 million. On that salary, I could afford to retire today, and with my leave entitlements paid out, that would be enough to fund a modest lifestyle for the rest of my life. Story 75. Decent? Lord, no. I want to live, not just survive and go on vacation twice a year. But that's me. 10,000 minimum a month, so like, whatever per year. Story 76. Enough to own an average car, live in the average home, raise the average number of kids, while saving enough for the kids' community college and state college, emergency savings, retirement, and a modest vacation every couple of years. Story 77. Having 3 young children in Massachusetts with one very nice vacation a year, $12,000. We are at $422,000 a year in expenses. The biggest categories are college savings at $152,000, childcare at $124,000, mortgage at $96,000, food at $35,000, and charity at $30,000. One child has complex medical needs, which adds to the childcare. Combined, we make $1.3 million gross. After 37% federal and 9% state tax, less Social Security, and maxing out our retirement accounts, we net about $650,000 in income. It seems like a lot, but to be honest, I would only feel comfortable with double that. I am constantly stressed and question every purchase because despite working 65-hour weeks and earning a great living and saving, things always feel tight. I hope that when they are in public school, at least 2 of the 3, expenses will feel far more manageable because we definitely won't be able to work the way we do now, like dogs. Or maybe we should just leave Massachusetts because apparently it's the most expensive state to raise a family. Story 78. It really depends on a few things. Did I find a wife again? If so, I'd probably need more. If I'm single, though, I just need enough for a decent car, a small 1-bedroom place to live, and enough to save a few $100s for bigger purchases once a year or every few years. I could comfortably live by myself on $4,000 to $5,000 a month at most. Story 79. Enough to cover rent or mortgage, bills, food, fun, and savings comfortably. It depends on location, but around $70,000 to $90,000 in the United States hits that sweet spot. Story 80. It depends on where you live. I can live comfortably on $40,000 a year before taxes, so anything above that would be great. Story 81. I live in New York City in the West Village without roommates and spend about $50,000 a year. So that plus savings plus taxes, maybe $90,000. Story 82. I never like questions like this because they only factor in my salary, not inflation or how life might change, like having kids, buying a house, and so on. Anyone can say $250,000, but then that would be a boring question, no? Story 83. I think there was some research a few years ago that proved money does buy happiness up to a certain point. So, my answer is however much that amount is. Most likely, that number from that particular study needs to be adjusted for inflation, but that is what I would say the salary for a decent life would be. Story 84. I just had my salary bumped up and made about $300,000 last year. I've made anywhere between $55,000 to $300,000 since I've been working after college. I would say once I hit around $150,000 in a medium cost of living area as a single person with no kids, I felt like a king. Would have been perfectly fine not ever making more. I live essentially the exact same life on $300,000 as I did at $150,000. That being said, the extra money is just nice for saving more. Realistically, decent was whenever I hit $100,000, where I could pretty much just have a normal middle-class life without much financial stress. Story 85. In my area, at least $100,000 per working person. So a family would need $200,000 to live comfortably, including saving up to purchase a house, plus some leftover for traveling, eating out, and so on. Story 86. It depends. Are you single, married, or do you have kids? I'd say $75,000 for singles, $160,000 for dual income no kids couples, and add $25,000 to $35,000 per kid to that. Story 87. In Virginia Beach with a mortgage, car payment, utilities, and going out to eat, $100,000 to $110,000. For a single person. Story 88. It depends on where you live, the size of the family you need to support, and what you define as a decent life. Story 89. $350,000 combined. Right now we make $250,000 and we're still confused about how we don't have any luxuries. High cost of living, yes. Kids in minimal extracurriculars. But we live a wildly middle-class life for this salary, budgeting just to pay for braces, not vacationing this year due to other costs, and so on. Story 90. With $100,000 a year, I'd be in the top 0.1% in my country. I'd be more than happy with $75,000, to be honest. Story 91. Approximately $180,000 to $200,000. Last 2 years, household income was $170,000 to $180,000 between my spouse and me. I feel we are solidly in the new middle class. We can afford the things we want, but not everything. We drive 14-plus-year-old vehicles that overall are still in decent shape. We take one nice week-long vacation a year. We grocery shop without worrying about prices. However, we still rent in our mid-30s and feel very priced out of the housing market. I'm not confident we will ever comfortably be able to own unless we look outside our desired housing markets. Coastal blue states. Story 92. I live in Japan and make less than $2,000 a month, but I live a very good life. I think around $4,000 a month would be close to perfect. Anything more would be luxury. Story 93. $100,000. Flat. It's good income to cover all the basic housing, food, and clothing needs with some good padding for fun. Not wealthy, but not average. Very comfortable and worry-free life. Story 94. I feel like I could live on any salary that allows me to live alone without worrying about food or utilities, and that increases at the same rate as inflation. My biggest thing would be job security. As long as it's a job where I don't have to worry about being fired or laid off, living within my means would be very easy. Story 95. It depends very much on your geography and your idea of decent. For me, salary must be 3 times rent for life to be decent. But if you're happy with a really low rent, that can change. Story 96. It's highly dependent on where you live, and your definition of decent. Generally, you'll be comfortable and able to save for retirement and such by taking the cost of living table and doubling it. Tripling it, you would be very well off. For example, I'm in California, so if both my wife and I had a salary of $106,000 per year, we'd be doing great. But if we both had $159,000 per year, we'd be fairly rich. Obviously, the city matters more than the state. New York has a lower cost of living than California on that table. But New York City is a lot more expensive than the California suburb I live in. But the general rule of thumb applies. Double the cost of living, decent life achieved. Triple it, and your problems are all of your own making. Story 97. Enough passive income to live anywhere I wanted, with no financial issues, either daily, medical, or for future retirement. I'd also need to set up and maintain a fully equipped workshop, plus enough money to run a YouTube-worthy renovation project without relying on YouTube revenue. So, about $200,000. Story 98. $75,000 for a comfortable living, but it's still not going to be enough. If we make more, we spend more, and our standard of living improves. Then we want more. If you own a successful business, you might reach the ultimate level. I know a multimillionaire now who started a business with his life savings. $80,000. And after 16 years of blood, sweat, and tears, he sold it. Afterwards, he invested a big portion into dividend-paying stocks, so now he lives on the returns without touching the principal. His annual income is about $1.1 million, and he says he can barely spend it all. He's very generous, even among strangers. When he said he could barely spend it, it resonated with me. He's hit that spot where it's actually enough. It also told me I'm never going to reach that level. Story 99. It depends on where you live, how you live, and whether you're disciplined enough to avoid lifestyle creep. Story 100. Single? Family? Low cost of living? Very high cost of living? Dual income? No kids? 10 kids? But I'd say $350,000 to $400,000 for a middle-class life. Story 101. $120,000 would be perfect. Enough money to have all the necessities and extra for nice things, and still be able to save $1,000 to $1,500 per month. Story 102. There is a sweet spot. If you have too much money, you need to employ someone to manage it. And there's a temptation to buy multiple properties which also need property management, for example, maintenance, pool cleaning, gardeners, chefs. Now, you need managers to oversee all the staff and your money, and perfect trust in those managers. The top level is attending billionaire events on your private yacht. Organizing that alone would require a significant number of well-paid staff. Story 103. Depends on your definition of a decent life. It's all relative. I volunteered and lived in India at an orphanage for more than a year when I was 19. Daily laborers made about $2 a day. I remember getting very excited about making $32 per hour after a good raise from work some years later when I was back stateside. I make about $160,000 per year now, and it's sort of enough. 3 young kids, my wife doesn't work. Life is pretty good and we are happy. I drive a shitbox car, we thrift most of our clothes, buy used things when we can. I wear a $15 old-school Casio watch, and I tend not to buy alcohol at restaurants. Healthcare is shitty and we have a little bit of debt to pay off. So it's decent. $200,000 would make things a lot easier, but I don't need it. Story 104. I make $70,000 a year now, and I feel like between $80,000 and $90,000, I'd be feeling pretty good about myself and would be pretty good with a salary in that range. Story 105. I was doing decently on $200,000 a year until I was laid off. Magic 8 Ball says, we'll probably never see it again. Story 106. Every salary milestone I have achieved has led me to believe the next one is the right amount. Find other ways to achieve a decent life. Story 107. It doesn't matter because once you make whatever that number is, you're going to wish you always had more. Story 108. I'm happy. I probably make $50,000 a year, but I'm taking a sabbatical from a stressful job where I made over twice that. Living in a paid-off house, eating at home a lot, spending time with my kid, and driving a decent beater truck. I'll probably go back to a position to attain a near full pension, but there's a balance. Time and lack of stress are pretty valuable. Story 109. I'm fine where I am. Our household income would be considered pretty low by most people's standards, but I'm a frugal person, so it's all good. Also a bit lucky too, since I'm in a rent-controlled building and effectively paying 2012 rent prices. Story 110. When I entered the workforce, I used to say, if I make $1,000 a week, life would be great. I make between $1,200 and $1,500 a week, and it would be great if I made $1,800 to $2,000 a week. Story 111. That's too vague. It varies too much depending on where you want to live, how big you want your family to be, and whether you're running on multiple salaries or just one for the family. In the United States, it's going to be somewhere between $60,000 and $350,000, depending on those constraints. Story 112. For a single person living in a Tier 2 or Tier 3 city, $200,000 is the sweet spot. Bump that to $250,000 to $300,000 for Tier 1 cities. If you have a family, let's say 2 to 4 kids, you really don't see decent kick-in until you're making around $500,000 a year. That's when I started to feel like I didn't have to worry about money all the time. You can afford decent cars, clothes, you can put your kids into private school if you want, and so on. This assumes you're not living in a city, but near one in the suburbs. Story 113. I actually really enjoy the salary that I've finally reached. I'm at a point where I'm not swimming in debt other than school loans, and on most paydays I have enough left over to actually enjoy life just a bit. I fought really hard to get to this point, however. I worked 2 jobs for over a decade, where for 5 of those years I had only 2 to 4 days off a month, and now I have 2 days off in every other weekend. Story 114. It depends on the location. Southern California? Probably 150,000. Lamoni, Iowa? Like 40,000. Story 115. If you're living in London with kids and planning to own a house, even in the outskirts, you need at least £150,000 after tax and pension deductions to live comfortably. Houses cost £1 million, which means about £4,500 to £5,000 in monthly mortgage payments, and maternity pay isn't the best. If you already own a house, £100,000 is great. Add another $120,000 if you want to send your kids to private schools. Story 116. It's going to vary too much by where you live, but I would say if my take-home pay meant that my monthly expenses were 40%, I could save 10% for retirement, save 25% for a rainy day fund, and have 25% for fun stuff. I think that would be fantastic. Where I live, that would be about $10,000 a month, so that's about $180,000 before taxes. Story 117. $80,000 to $100,000 will get you a very comfortable life in a lot of places around America. You just might not be living in a metro area. Story 118. $60,000 less than I currently make. No, seriously. I'm one of the lucky few who actually make more than I need to be comfortable. I'm currently saving and investing like crazy to generate a large enough account that I can generate money to cover my needs without working. Story 119. I always said, the amount where I don't have to check my bank account to buy gas. Story 120. Damn, I'm almost 40, and 50,000 would be a dream, even with my experience and education. Story 121. What's decent changes greatly if I consider the ability to have children. I'd be looking for 120,000 without and 180,000 with. Story 122. I'm sorry, OP, but this is a completely worthless question without context. There are policies of the country to consider, the taxes of the province, the cost of living of the city, the salary, and the specific needs of the individual. It is not the same to have kids with special needs living in a high cost of living city with a huge housing crisis and a tax burden nearing 50%, and not even getting health care, than a single young dude working remotely in the middle of nowhere and getting the big bucks and all the public advantages of a decent nation. Regardless, I'd say it is being able to afford quality healthcare, education, transportation, housing, food, vacations, and having extras. Basically being able to afford at least 75% of all of that good quality stuff and being able to splurge a bit or invest a reasonable amount. How much that is? No idea, but eyeballing it, I'd say anything between $5,000 and $20,000 a month, net, for a typical family. Enough to be humbly well off, but not quite into rich territory. I'm probably either under or overstating the range depending on what you mean by decent, though. Story 123. It depends on where you live and if you have kids. 300,000 is the answer, and I make more than that. Story 124. Whatever covers expenses, allows for healthy savings, and the ability to take chunks of time off work to go on holiday or work on hobbies. £100,000 after tax in the UK would be nice. That would cover a £2,000 mortgage, £20,000 into an individual savings account per year, decent holidays, a car, and general expenses, with enough money left over for hobbies. Story 125. The main problem is when you make more money, you tend to spend more. It is called lifestyle inflation. You may have heard the saying, keeping up with the Joneses. That is an extreme example of lifestyle inflation. It manifests differently for each person. For small raises, it might be going out to eat one extra time a month, or maybe investing a bit more in your hobby. For larger raises, it might be finding a nicer place to live or driving a nicer car. Story 126. 70 to 80,000 in the South if you have no kids. I'm in that bracket at 29 years old with 0 kids and just a girlfriend. I live perfectly fine. Story 127. I won't say a number. I'll say a formula. If your expenses are 50% of your total income, covered by the other 50% used for investments and dividends, split in different ways, you're sussed. Story 128. For my ideal life of contentment, I'd say around $100,000. However, I'm a pretty minimalist and low-maintenance guy. If I were getting $25,000 in passive income, I could probably coast on that. Split my time between a beach in Thailand and my camper van in the United States. Story 129. $8,000 for housing, utilities, and so on. $5,000 for childcare and school. $6,000 for other general living expenses and food. That totals $19,000 per month in expenses. Pre-tax, that's a $350,000 salary. Now add in vacations and savings for retirement, and it's easily $500,000 to $600,000 per year. Story 130. For a married couple with 2 kids, I'd say a combined income of $150,000 or more would be ideal. Save some money, take some trips, let the kids be involved in whatever sports or interests they wish to pursue. Have a nice house with at least 3 bedrooms, always have reliable vehicles, balance decent grocery runs with going out to eat a couple times a week as a family, and minimize debt. $130,000 to $140,000 can get close, but $150,000 feels like the cushion number. Story 131. If I wasn't so bad with credit cards, I'd be living a very financially stable life. I'm still all right, clawing my way out, but still, I make more than I ever expected to. Story 132. I'm at a point where I don't think my significant raise will change my lifestyle. It does give me enough to invest where I think my bigger growth should come from. Story 133. I think $100,000 a year is a decent living. Definitely able to get by on less, but for saving for the future and not stressing about bills and such, $100,000 in an affordable area. Story 134. I would be happy with 8,000 euros net per month. That will help me pay off a house and a car of my choice while still being able to afford living. Nothing too crazy, honestly. Story 135. Where I live, I'd say a solid 100,000 per year with consistent paychecks is perfect. Pays the bills, lets you save, and gives you fun money. The key is consistency. Story 136. For me, it's just slightly, noticeably more than my neighbors. As long as I have slightly more than those around me, I'm happy. They say comparison is the thief of joy. And it is if you have less. Story 137. There is no amount of money that would give one a perfect life. Perfect life is unattainable. The richest man in history proves this. Elon. Story 138. I've made up to $600,000, and while it was nice, the stress I felt was not worth it. Now I make $250,000 with hardly any stress at all. I know this is still a great amount, but my spending has been much more cautious. The point isn't about the amount of the salary. I think it's more about the stress and well-being you can have. Too little money causes financial stress, but if making a lot is also stressful, then cutting back or changing course is worth it. So I'd say the ideal yearly salary is the one that gives you the least amount of overall life stress. Story 139. Let's be real. This is going to depend on where you live and your own expectations for living comfortably. In my own experience, when I had a kid in daycare, my husband and I made about $75,000 together. And we were in debt, living paycheck to paycheck. By a stroke of luck, we both got new jobs after I had my second kid. So then we were making about $95,000 combined. That's when we were able to get out of debt and start saving. Now we make about $250,000 combined and are able to save a lot. Story 140. You should be looking at the perfect amount of expenses too. Your peace of mind is really just based on whatever's left over after all is said and done. Story 141. I think somewhere around 120,000 to 140,000, and then adjusting for inflation every year is pretty ideal. Story 142. $1 million a year. Through my lifetime, I think I could survive comfortably with that amount, even after inflation. Story 143. Honestly, I don't know. My wife makes a lot, and I'm in the pretty low six figures as well. We still feel broke because we have to take care of our parents who don't have retirement funds set up. Plus, we have a 3-month-old now, so we're planning for college, maybe buying a home. We always feel far behind. Story 144. $300,000 to never have fears about money again. Have plenty saved for oh shit moments, and survive another goddamn year of 10% inflation eating me alive while a business thinks it's acceptable to shell out 2% cost of living increase raises. If you had asked me pre-COVID, I would have answered half that, but I've seen how goddamn greedy these fucking businesses get the second they have the chance. They don't get that chance anymore. Story 145. $45,000 as a single guy with an $800 per month mortgage and no car payment was decent to me. $60,000 was fantastic. Now, with a wife and a $1,200 per month mortgage and no kids or car payments, $60,000 is decent. $80,000 fulfills our needs and lets us have like $15,000 worth of home improvement projects and $5,000 for vacations. Everything beyond $80,000 for us is just frosting and gives us many more options. Story 146. For me, $200,000. I make $75,000. I think I'd live fine at $99,900, but once you hit that $100,000 tax bracket, I'd want $200,000 to support the level up lifestyle. Story 147. 10 years ago, I said if I made $70,000 a year, I'd be all right. I think it was a good answer for the time. I make a comfortable salary now, but I've come to the realization that I'll never make it rich. Story 148. I feel like I've had a decent life ever since my wife and I started regularly making $140,000 or more together. Up to that point, it always felt like we were budgeting a lot and worrying about making sure everything was paid. As we passed 100,000, everything ended up on autopay. As we got closer to where we are now, it got easier to not worry about random big expenses. A $5,000 tax bill? Okay. $2,000 in car repairs? Okay. A random cruise a weekend before it happens for $1,000? Okay. My sister being hard up for money and asking about a loan? Okay. We live fairly cheaply. We rent because we move around fairly regularly, but we have 1 leased vehicle and 2 paid off vehicles. I have a couple of motorcycles that are paid off. It's easy when you're not working to pay off payments on things you couldn't afford outright. I'm totally comfortable where we are, but I'd like it more if we were closer to 200,000 because we'd be dumping a lot of extra money into retirement accounts and accounts for our daughter. We're still young, though. We have time. Story 149. It depends on where you live and what you consider a decent life. I make, on average, $53,000 a year. With a moderate budget, I do just fine. Story 150. Single?
$62,000.
Family with a stay-at-home wife? $100,000. But it all comes down to budgeting and staying within that budget. Made $130,000 last year with terrible budgeting, and we lived very comfortably, but looking back, we wasted a lot of money on unimportant bullshit. Story 151. This depends on your ability to live within your means. My pricing is based on the American economy. If you got a mortgage before 2020, then I would say $75,000 for up to a family of 4, with raises to account for inflation. If you got your mortgage after 2020, I'd say $160,000. If you live in a big city like New York City or Los Angeles, then at least double that. But again, this depends on you, your definition of a good life, and your ability to live within your means. Story 152. This is quite subjective. It all depends on your lifestyle and whether you live in moderation or in luxury. There are other factors as well, but those variables can also fluctuate.